talk about something you've probably seen and maybe even worried about. These headlines that scream AI is causing brain rot. It's a terrifying idea, right? That the very tools we're all starting to use might be quietly turning our minds to mush. Well, today, we're going to slice right through that panic and figure out what is really going on. I mean, a headline like this, it gives you a jolt. The idea that using something like ChatGPT is literally killing your neurons, no wonder it spread like wildfire across the internet. And what made it so scary, so convincing, is that it all seemed to point back to a real scientific study. But the question is, how much of this was actual science and how much of it was just, good old-fashioned media panic? Are we really looking at a genuine neurological threat here? Or is this just a classic case of research getting twisted and blown way, way out of proportion? Okay, so this whole brain rot story, it all comes from one single study out of the MIT Media Lab. And here is the kicker. It was a preprint. Now, for anyone who doesn't live in the world of academic research, that just means it hadn't gone through peer review yet. That super important process where other scientists check your work to make sure it's solid. The researchers themselves came up with a perfect analogy for what happened. They said it's like their work was still baking in the research oven. It wasn't done yet, but the media just yanked it out, sprinkled the most sensational bits with a heavy dose of panic, and served this half-baked story up to all of us. And all the important details, all the nuance, it just got left on the cutting room floor. So to get to the actual truth, we're going to clear the air. Let's systematically tear down the 4 biggest myths that fueled this whole panic. And we'll do it using what the study actually found. First, and this is the big one, no, AI is not causing permanent brain damage. What the brain scans actually showed was just lower brain activation. The researchers called it a sleepy cortex. It's more like your brain is just going into a low power mode because a tool is doing some of the work. It is absolutely not the same thing as neurons dying. In fact, an EEG machine can't even measure brain damage. Second, this whole idea that AI just automatically crushes your creativity, that's a huge leap. The study didn't measure creativity at all. It measured how well people could remember what they wrote later on. So that lower brain activity, it might not be a sign of your brain getting weaker. It could just be a sign of it being more efficient. It's like using a calculator for a big math problem instead of doing it all in your head. And another thing, it's not this all or nothing game where any help is bad. The study had another group of people who just used a regular search engine, and they landed right in the middle, performing better than the ChatGPT group, but not as well as the brain-only group. And that proves that the kind of tool you use and how you use it makes a huge difference. And finally, let's just be real about the science here. One single study, especially a small preliminary one that hasn't even been checked by other experts, is never ever settled science. It's a question, a starting point for more research, not the final answer. And when I say this study was small, I mean, it was really small. Yep, 18. That's it. All those crazy headlines about permanent brain damage were based on EEG data from just 18 people. That is a tiny, tiny sample size. You just can't make these huge sweeping claims about all of humanity based on that. Kind of puts the whole panic into perspective, doesn't it? So if it's not brain rot, then what is actually happening? Well, the researchers gave us a much, much better and more accurate way to think about what happens when we offload our mental work onto AI. They call it cognitive debt. And honestly, the best way to get it is to think about it just like financial debt. When you let an AI do the heavy mental lifting, you're basically taking out a short-term loan on your thinking. You get the easy answer right now, but you're creating a kind of mental IOU that you might have to pay back later. Think about it like this. You're on a bike and you're just cruising down a long hill. It's amazing. It feels totally effortless. You're going fast. It's great. But if you only ever coast downhill, you're not building the muscle and the stamina you're going to need for that next big uphill climb. And here is the cost of that debt, right here in the data. After 24 hours, the writers who used only their brains could remember almost half of what they wrote. But the writers who got help from ChatGPT, they recalled only 17%. That's a huge drop. It shows that when we don't put in the mental effort to create something, we don't build the memory pathways to retain it. Okay, but this does not mean you need to go and delete your AI apps. Not at all. It just means we need to get smarter about how we use them. In fact, the researchers actually gave us a playbook for how to manage this cognitive debt so we can get all the benefits of AI without the major drawbacks. Their playbook has 4 really smart moves. First, alternate your tools. Drop something on your own, then bring in the AI to help you revise. Second, set up retrieval checkpoints. Just pause and force yourself to remember what you've just written or done. Third, visible metacognition, which is just a fancy way of saying actually think about the AI's suggestions instead of just accepting them. And finally, use prompt scaffolds. Guide the AI with detailed instructions. Don't just delegate the whole task to it on autopilot. So, when you strip away all the scary headlines and the panic, what's the real lesson here? Well, it's actually something really simple and powerful about how we should all be thinking about these new tools. It's this: the most important thing isn't if you use AI, it's when you use it. The study actually found that people who did their own thinking first and then used AI to help them, they produced higher quality work and showed more brain engagement. The sequence is everything. This whole idea actually supports a teaching method called Unbloom It. And the concept is super simple. First, you learn the basics yourself without any AI. You build your own foundation, do the hard work. Then you bring in AI, not as a crutch to do the work for you, but as a sparring partner to challenge your ideas and help you think more critically. You know, one of the authors summed up this entire challenge perfectly. They said the goal is to borrow brilliance from machines without bankrupting our own cognitive capacities. It's all about finding that healthy, sustainable balance. So in the end, the goal isn't to run away from AI in fear. It's to be thoughtful and intentional about it. The question isn't, how can I make this easier? The real question we should all be asking ourselves is this: how will you design moments of productive friction? How will you build in those little uphill climbs to make sure you keep your mind sharp and engaged?